One of the things that I find very fascinating is how we often, in modern science, we classify papers. We just look at the number of papers that somebody's written or the number of citations that they have. We classify things to numbers. Um, and I think about this a lot, right? The with the masters from many years ago, um, in in uh, in Florence, Italy, right? So we think about Michelangelo and all of these folks, Leonardo, Da Vinci, and then we look at what they're doing, and then we classify if we're using that sort of modern structure that we have today. We would look at them and we'd say, well, they just painted a wall, um, and yet we don't realize that it's a Sistine Chapel that they made, or they just painted a painting, and we classify that painting as the same as any other painting that you've seen and any other wall that you've seen, and then you simply say, well, that is just one painting. That's all they did. Why would they only spend the time to make that one thing? And it doesn't, that's all they did. Like, that is the thing that they actually did. And they weren't productive. And I want to point out that there's a lot of people that would have spent the time to make the 16th chapel and look at it, and we'd say that that is just one painting. But they would have passed it over, or they would have tried, and it wouldn't have been the thing that they would have liked, but it would have taken just as long as Michelangelo or Leonardo. And sorry, it is Michelangelo. So they would have taken just as long to do it, and it would have been a failure. Right? And we classify all of these things together, all of these different moments where we look at it and we say they didn't accomplish anything, that they were problematic. I also think about um, that all of those folks are males, right? Which means, and they're males of relatively privileged opportunities. I think about all the other people that didn't get that access, that didn't get trained by other masters. I think about this a lot and how important it actually is, right? Because that means by default they would never get, and nobody else would get these opportunities. And we think of that as that is a fair system. We think of it as, um, well, that's just the way that it works, right? And we sort of classify all these things together. We say, well, Michelangelo, Leonardo weren't that productive. They weren't that important. If you were to look at and think about the modern structure of how we structured um, science and basically art as well. And I find it fascinating that we do this. And we know, now we know that those are fundamentally different. They're not the same thing. That even if they made one painting, the Mona Lisa, um, that is more of a significant contribution to the world than if somebody had built 100 walls, for example, or painted, um, made 1,000 different paintings produced in some factory in some um, part of the world. I think about that as we're classifying all of these things as the same thing. and we're calling them the same thing. And I think it's fascinating how we do that. Not to say that is right or wrong, but I think it's just fascinating that we have a tendency to look at these things and count them as the same sort of thing. And then because of that, we would classify Leonardo as not that good, um, because they only made one thing. So why do we actually have this structure today if we know that this is challenging, right? Or some of us are see that as challenging. And the reason is that it does create incentives for people to work really hard and to, on average, produce a lot of stuff, right? The sort of basic system that they had many years ago, where somebody would spend a great deal of time on one particular thing, is very costly, and it didn't it's not as quote unquote productive as it is today, right? Like there is a lot of things that get produced today simply because of the sort of counting aspect of our life. Um, so if that's the case, what do we do, right? Like how do we actually handle this situation? And the truth is that we have to live within the system that we that we're in, and that is fine. But then also recognize that we often cannot count and compare things that probably should not be counted and compared. And at what point do you look at that? Do you say that these things can be compared? And the truth is that it's very much a subjective call. You can't tell why is it that somebody that spends a great deal of time, a master today, somebody that's actually, world class painter, they might just paint one stripe, for example. It's unlikely, but they might do that. We can't compare that with somebody that paints walls. Those things are very, very different in terms of what it actually means, the sort of challenges they go through. That person that just paints a couple of stripes, um, it may take them an awful lot of time to think about what that stripe means and really think about those things compared to the painter. Um, and here's the other challenging thing is that we have the advantage of looking at, the Sistine Chapel today and looking at 400 years later and or 500 years later and looking at it, we're saying, well, yeah, that was a masterpiece. Um, we often can't do that. We don't have the advantage of time to classify and think about things. And we have to sort of take them at face value. So what does that mean? It's highly likely that Michelangelo today and Leonardo today um, would not be able to do the things that they do, and they did. Um, and that's just sort of systematic of what we actually do, of the sort of culture, the system that we live in. But it was true back then too. That was such an unusual circumstance for somebody to do that, and have the resources to do that, that was even a rare and peculiar thing then as well. I just want everybody to realize, um, that there is a lot of challenges with the comparing system that we have today. It's very productive. And to take a step back and say, are we comparing things that are of equal value, at any given moment? And the truth is, we might not be. And that's okay. Um, it's not okay in the sense of placing equal value on all of them and saying that they're the same thing. Um, but it's okay in the sense that like this is a normative thing that we actually do. This is just basically what we do as human beings. And we also have to realize like, hey, there's a lot of nuance to life, and that's something that we should consider. Is that there is just a lot of nuance, and we have to look at all of that nuance and appreciate it for what it actually is. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.